The 19th National Congress of the Communist Party of China closed Tuesday here in Beijing. And today I'll be asking how China's leaders are likely to fulfill Xi's people-centered philosophy in bringing tangible benefits to the population. Plus, as the International Trade Center is about to open the 2017 World Export Development Forum in Budapest, my colleague Liu Xin will be finding out how companies are changing their ways of doing business in an interconnected world. Welcome to The Point. I'm Cheng Lei.
Every 5 years, the Chinese Communist Party holds its National Congress. This month, the 19th Congress opens in Beijing. It will elect a new central leadership and chart the course for the party as well as the country over the next 5 years and beyond. Who will step into the party's top leadership, the Politburo Standing Committee? Will the Congress look to amend the party constitution? Which direction will the anti-corruption campaign be heading? How will the CPC manage the Chinese economy, foreign affairs and military? Tune into CGTN for all the answers as the CPC decides.
The curtains may have fallen at the National Congress of the Communist Party of China, but China is rising like never before. Today, we look at Xi Jinping's thoughts on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. How can the new leadership bring tangible benefits to the masses? Joining me in the studio are Wang, State Councillor, and Martin Jacks, author of When China Rules the World. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Let me start by asking you about this people-centered philosophy, which is an important part of Xi Jinping's thoughts on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era, which he unveiled at the Congress. Now, the word 人民 or people was actually mentioned more than 170 times in his report. How much of this is influenced by the fact that he spent 7 years in southwest China's Shanxi, northwest China's Shanxi province as a farmer and also as a county party secretary? Mr. Wang?
Yeah, I think this is really quite impressive. I mean, he mentioned so many times of the people, and that dates back to his experience. I mean, when he was even as young as 15 years old, he went down to countryside in Shanxi province where he toiled in the fields. He has get along with the farmers, and one of the very, very poor areas actually in China. And also, I mean, throughout his career, he was at a very basic level, at the county level. You know, he was the party secretary of Hebei province, which is also not that well off. So I think he has a lot of down to earth and also basic at the bottom experience with the masses, with the poor people, so that he actually knows how to change the China, I mean, from the bottom. So that's where he has also served all the ranks. And then I think that his experience in the Shanxi province, 8 years in the countryside, certainly makes him feel closer to the people and the general masses of China.
Martin, is that how you see him?
Yeah, I agree with that very much. The only point I would really add is that I think when he became General Secretary, he obviously had a feeling, a view, strongly held view, that the party to some extent was drifting, and it was there was a fair amount of disillusionment around, and somehow elitism, corruption, and so on. And somehow or other, he felt that the party needed to reconnect itself with the people. And I think that, and I think that he's really made a big attempt to do that in all sorts of ways. Obviously, the anti-corruption campaign and giving China a new sense of identity, a new sense of direction. And I think that is all about, if you like, regrounding the party amongst the people in a new kind of way.
So he's basically urging party members to always breathe the same breath as the people, share the same future, and stay truly connected to them. Can the CPC, with such a varied 89 million members, deliver that?
Well, I think it's certainly the last 5 years we see it's getting closer, or maybe actually gradually reaching that kind of objective, because if the party is really consolidating, if it's getting really efficient, if it's really serving its purpose of serving the people, I think that if the mechanism is established, the legal framework is in progress and established, that can contain the corruption, and also that really you have to serve the people. I mean, that's the mandate. That's the having the mandate that historically China is like that. Is always people are for the mandarins or the bureaucrats that really, if you can't serve the people, why don't you go home? That kind of concept. So I think if this is really, getting down to earth and really we cultivate that kind of spirit throughout the party system and make it a system, that could be something, new. So on one hand, you've got a very stable and effective party system. On the other hand, you find ways to contain the corruptions and anti-corruptions, that balance and checks are in place. That could be a new methodology for management of those kind of making progress in China.
Can a one-party system deliver that?
Of course, the problem is with any party system, but especially a one-party system, the danger is that the party ossifies and it becomes self-serving and self-referential, and too many of the officials are on the make in relationship to it and engaging in corruption. That's the great danger. But actually, if you look at China's experience, of course, it's had these tendencies. These problems are constantly reoccurring. There's no question about that. But the extraordinary thing, I think, about the Chinese Communist Party is its ability to reinvent itself. I mean, the great moment, if you like, from Mao to Deng. I mean, that was an extraordinary moment. I mean, how many political parties in the world have ever made any shift like that? It was a most extraordinary thing. How do you do it? How does a party do it? I think it's got to have very deep roots and a great sense of self-confidence to make such a change. Now, in fact, this reinvigoration of the party seems to me to be a very strong feature of it. It keeps renewing itself. It keeps moving. It keeps adopting new perspectives. So normally the criticism of the Chinese Communist Party is, it's a one-party system, it's bound to ossify, and so on. But when you compare the party system here with what's happening in the West now, the comparison is slightly invidious for the West. Because, it's the Western systems at the moment, I'm not saying they're going to collapse or anything like that, but they are in a certain degree of decay. So it's not true that if you have a multi-party system, somehow they invigorate each other.
You're probably waiting for the opposition party to reinvigorate you, and that probably doesn't happen.
Well, I think actually the big problem one of the big problems in the West is actually the party system is an oligopoly.
Right.
And that the problem is that you don't really get much genuine competition because so much is shared.
But now I also think that the competition come around the world as well. You got internet, you got WeChat, you got international media observations. So you got observations and criticism from all fronts. So that makes yourself renew as well.
Yeah, that's
so
very
that
important.
it's become international democracy to push things forward. Actually.
So let's talk about one of the new thoughts brought up at the Congress, which is the new contradiction, basically talking about between people's growing demands and the inadequate developments, the imbalances. So it looks like the government is very serious about committing to addressing that. Give us some examples of these contradictions.
Well, I think there's quite some. Of course. For example, I think since the last 5 years, the President Xi has really launched a program, drive of alleviate the poverty, poverty in China. So we see every year about 10 million people get out of that. But still, there's quite a number of people still there. 40, 50 million public still living in the poverty, and that's one thing. But on the other side, I see the gap between rural and urban still is kind of widening.
Large.
Yeah, very large as well. So, and also probably many young people can't afford houses and things like that. So I think there's still way, and also so many children probably left behind in the rural area. So there's
60
still
million.
there's mounting challenges ahead to really tackle that kind of challenges and then narrow the gap. I think that's probably the new mandate for the next 5 years, or even more. So to really minimize the differences and satisfy the people's desire for good life, and also the inadequate development and unbalanced development. So that I think this is really the next challenge for the CPC.
So do you think things like regional integration, things like more aggressive social welfare programs are on the cards?
Well, I think that China's got to move on from simply emphasizing poverty reduction, on which it's had a tremendous record, to something else, which is unrelated to it, and that is a Gini coefficient, which is now one of the world's highest, and roughly on a par with that of the United States. Now, there are lots of reasons for this. China's a very big country, huge country, a continent, and there are many differences, disparities across the country in terms, and not just contemporary, but they're historically grounded. Now the point is that whatever they are, it makes it very complicated to deal with them. But it's patently clear when you're in a big city like Shanghai or Beijing and so on that there are some very big disparities of wealth. Now this is dangerous. It is a dangerous problem for China. Now at the moment I don't think it is, but it could become very serious. And anyway, and I think I was very interested in the use of the word imbalanced by the General Secretary, because it seems to me that I think and I hope actually that this question of the disparity of income and wealth is going to be addressed really seriously over the next period.
But also, actually, the 200 to 300 million migrant workers actually in China, across China, that has to be addressed as well. I think that's probably one of the next challenges.
That's one area I thought there'd be more progress in the last 5 years. Actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of progress, but I think there's urbanization, get rid of the hukou restrictions.
Exactly. Yeah.
That kind of thing, particularly for.
We keep talking about it.
Yeah,
but we haven't seen
but
any
very little, it seems to me, has happened in this period.
Right. What about the fact that, the difference between China's so-called people-centered philosophy and the concept of a government of the people, by the people, for the people, which was a quote from US President Abraham Lincoln. How do those two compare?
Well, personally, I think that China has a philosophy that there's always that people respect authority, but also really looking for the officials or the bureaucrats that really can serve the people, or maybe really have to help the people. That's the God-given mandate. Actually, so as I said, if the official is not serving the people, he has to go home. He's out of job. That's the expectation of masses in China, and that's rooted in the thousands of years of history in China. People looking for clean officials. People looking for really open officials. So
it shows how rare they are.
Yeah. So I think that kind of tradition, that kind of culture is still probably playing a lot of role until today. So I think it's important that. On the one hand, we build up a system, balance and checks, but on the other hand, that kind of philosophy that officials should serve the people should really be truly established. That's very important. I
mean, I think it's chalk and cheese, actually, the two expressions. I mean, the American mantra is essentially about an electoral system. It's not about the involvement of the people in an ongoing way. It's their involvement in the elections, the election process. Now, the Chinese approach, I think, is very different. I agree with your point about this. I mean, I think that it's the Chinese philosophy, actually, which is this is a country which is very, very old and is based over time on a great deal of inclusivity and a recognition that if inclusivity breaks down, then you get really serious problems and the dangers even of some kind of fragmentation. So I think that the philosophy of governance is you've got to involve the people in all sorts of different ways, and that's I think that is so different from the Western philosophy.
Now, do you think that China is under the danger of populism, which is a global phenomenon, also taking hold here, rising populism in China?
No, I don't.
How?
I don't think. Look, the reason why there's been this populist upsurge in the West is firstly the Western financial crisis, secondly the subsequent stagnation in living standards, thirdly that a very significant section of the American population and the British population have experienced more or less stagnant living standards since the 1980s, something like that. So so who's Trump? Trump is representing those who feel really angry about this. Now take the Chinese situation. The Chinese situation is utterly different. Living standards across the board have been rising at more or less the same pace as economic growth.
I think that China is still on uphill, because of the last 70s since China joined WTO,
still got a number of
embrace the
dividends.
globalization. So there's still a lot of progress being made. But China probably someday will come to that stage. But I think now we're preventively have a policy, we have an objective for the 2035, 2050. So that kind of long-term objective to contain that. That's really what the CPC is trying to do.
And I think, I'll just add, that I think that China has a concept of inclusivity which doesn't exist in the West. So globalization, the losers, those who are left behind, were never cared for in countries
China
like the
has
United
left
States.
behind.
But China is aware that if you allow that to happen, then all hell could break loose. The country itself would be in difficulties.
Globalization has to continue in order for China to avoid that.
Definitely, which brings us to the next part. I wish we had more time to continue this vein of discussion. Thank you so much for your time today, gentlemen. That was Mr. Wang Huiyao, State Councillor, and Martin Jacques, author of When China Rules the World.
This is CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. I'm Jeff Moody, live in Beijing.
You're watching CGTN.
Coming to you from Washington, D.C.
You're watching CGTN.
Coming to you from my room.
I'm members of this
Mark, what can you tell us about events happening there?
politics.
This is a pretty picture. I think of the van.
Back over to Beijing.
To go after them.
All about
This is CGTN. CGTN. See the difference.
You're back with The Point. I'm subbing in for Liu Xin. President Xi has promised that China will become more and more open to help companies, especially small and medium-sized enterprises or SMEs, to better adjust to a more open market. The International Trade Center will hold its 2017 World Export Development Forum in Budapest, Hungary on October 25th and 26th. First, let's get you a backgrounder on the ITC.
The International Trade Center, or ITC, is a multilateral agency which has a joint mandate with the WTO and the United Nations through the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, otherwise known as the UNCTAD. Since its inception in 1964, the ITC has helped small and medium-sized enterprises in developing countries boost exports by making their goods and services more competitive and connecting them to global markets. Arantxa Gonzalez has been ITC's executive director since 2013. She had previously held leading positions at the WTO and the European Commission and has had 20 years of experience in international trade issues.
For the latest on the forum, my colleague Liu Xin is now in Budapest together with Arantxa Gonzalez, the executive director of the ITC. Let's cross over to her. Hey there, Liu Xin.
Hi, Chenlei, thank you very much. And indeed, I am very pleased to sit on the Danube with Arantxa Gonzalez. So let's go straight into the topic. This year, the region is the key word for ITC here in Budapest. Why?
Because the region is the door to the world. Normally, when small and medium enterprises begin their journey to international trade, they start with the region. And thus is why it's so important that we understand what makes for a good regional trade deal, what makes for good investments in regional infrastructure, because these two will enable small and medium enterprises to access the world through this door called the region.
Yeah, under the context we are in now, what are the challenges facing regional development for SMEs?
Well, the first one is, as I said, infrastructure, gaps in roads, railroads, digital infrastructure, which is the infrastructure of the 21st century. Thus is why it's so important that the One Belt, One Road initiative proceeds, because it will help close the infrastructure gap that exists all around the world. Just in Asia is a gap that has a price tag of $1.5 trillion per year. But beyond that, it's also about policies. It's also about regulations. It's about simplifying, facilitating the doing business for small and medium enterprises and doing trade agreements that are deep. The deeper the trade agreement, the more the trade agreement covers different subjects, the more it will help SMEs participate in value chains and through that improve their competitiveness, which is where SMEs have the biggest issues today.
Yeah, well, every year one of the features of this forum is this publication of the World SME Competitiveness Report, and then this year's report, it is said that China's role in world trade can be assessed in twofold. It supplies labor to production networks linked with more advanced economies and provides know-how and technology to lesser developed economies. So what do you think is the role of China in bringing regional development, regional opportunities to SMEs?
Well, it's a double role. First, it's creating huge regional opportunities in Asia. And this is why I'm so happy that the Chinese leadership has decided to do this big import fair in 2018. It sends a signal that China can be this turning point for regional integration in Asia. But China is not just in Asia. China also has aspirations to help build the regional markets in other parts of the world. This is where the Belt and Road Initiative, this is where its presence through companies, through technology, through investment is so important to generate value chain activity where this value chain activity doesn't exist today. And this is in two parts of the world. One is in the African continent and the other one is in Latin America. This is where value chains are less developed and where the opportunities for business, for small and medium enterprises, both Chinese but also local,
but
the future.
Do you see China's efforts, for instance, as we see in the example of the Belt and Road Initiative, bringing further opportunities to the regions that you just mentioned, for instance, Africa or Latin America?
Well, I very much think so. I mean, there is a space for everybody. As I said, just in Asia Pacific, the gap in infrastructure is $1.5 trillion every year. There is a space for everybody, for the United States, for Europe, for Japan, for Korea, for China. It's important that everybody comes to the table. But what is more important is what kind of investments are made. It has to be in hard infrastructure, but also in softer infrastructure, in helping develop entrepreneurs locally, in helping build the environment in which these entrepreneurs are going to thrive. Smaller investments, but which are equally important to help SMEs participate in international trade.
Yeah, one of the arguments or conclusions of this report is the capacity to connect drives cross-regional differences, and this is a very important conclusion drawn by the ITC this year. Now, China's Belt and Road Initiative is launched to exactly better connect regions. How do you think this initiative has done so far in helping connecting different regions?
Well, it's basically starting. And we can't pass big judgment still today. We have to wait a little bit. Also because this is a long-term initiative. This is not a short-term quick win. This is the strategy that China has for participating and developing the rest of the world for the next 30, 50 years. I think the beginnings are interesting. There was the summit this year, chaired by President Xi Jinping. Very important, send a signal. Everybody in China now is dialoguing with countries, with partners, with institutions, with agencies. The International Trade Center is one of the agencies that China is talking about to start rolling the initiative out. Early to tell, but it has created an amazing amount of expectations out there, of positive vibes that now needs to be delivered, because lots of people are expecting a lot from this Belt and Road in terms of Chinese investments abroad.
From organizing this forum so far, do you see the kind of sentiment of small and medium-sized enterprises in this part of the world, for instance, in Central and Eastern Europe? What are their major difficulties and their aspirations?
Their difficulties and aspirations of the small and medium enterprises are the same everywhere around the world. Take the case of Hungary. More than 99% of its businesses are MSMEs, and their challenge is called competitiveness. Being strong enough to grow from micro to small, from small to medium, and getting more competitive through participating in markets abroad. This is exactly the same challenge that Chinese MSMEs have, or that Ghanaian or that Ethiopian MSMEs have. The question is what policies are put in place to accompany MSMEs. This is why the World Export Development Forum that we are hosting here wants to zoom in MSMEs so that everybody pays a little bit more attention to the 99% of our economies.
Yeah. Well, I think the world's government, especially in developed economies, are doing enough or doing the right thing at this moment to provide the kind of conditions necessary to boost SMEs. For instance, we are seeing anti-globalization sentiment, we are seeing deglobalization efforts and, you know, talks about putting one country's interest before everybody else's.
What is true is that in many of our economies, the benefits of international trade have accrued only a very small percentage of our society. Basically 1%. The benefits have focused on the 1% and the costs have spread over the 99%. We have to turn this around. We have to make sure that trade works, that growth works for the 99%. This is where inclusive trade matters, where sustainable trade matters. This is why small and medium enterprises, women entrepreneurs, youth startups are so important. If we help connect them to international trade, the benefits of international trade would be better spread in our societies. We would be able to tackle inequality, which is the cancer in our economies, which is eroding public confidence in open markets.
Yeah, well, one of the key words that came out of the 19th Party Congress that just concluded this year is to tackle inadequate and imbalanced development to China. And China also pledged to continue to open to the world and to go further down on globalization. How do you read these signals that are coming out, and what are your expectations for the future of China's role and China's efforts to promote the kind of development that you just mentioned?
The signals clearly tell us that China is worried about inequalities, an unequal distribution of the gains in the Chinese society. And the recipe to address this is exactly what we have heard in this Congress: continue the opening up of the Chinese economy, give more opportunities to local and foreigners, and strengthen domestic policies. Invest more in education, in skills building, in active labor market policies, in infrastructure, in healthcare. Combining the two, open markets, strong domestic policies, which is the message I heard coming out of Beijing this week, is exactly the recipe that we need to ensure our societies benefit from better, more equal growth.
Thank you very much, Arantxa Gonzalez. All the best luck for this year's Expo Development Forum in Budapest. And that is it from me here in Budapest, Hungary. And it's back to you, Chen Lei.
Thanks so much for that, Liu Xin. Enjoy the goulash. And that's going to do it for this edition of The Point. As always, you can follow us on Twitter or visit our Facebook page using the handle @ThePointWithLiuXin. Download the CGTN Live app if you haven't done already to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. I'm Chen Lei, subbing in for Liu Xin in Beijing.